States are the primary actors. They all possess offensive capabilities. They are uncertain about one another's intentions, and they exist in a state of anarchy. Hobbes would be proud. Each one of these conditions leads the realist to base his assumptions about international relations upon a foundation of fear. This is fear modeled as theory. At its core, realists maintain that the international system is anarchical. World Federalists hold out hope that the creation of an international organization charged with collective security and peacemaking will create a global government that would overcome Hobbesian anarchy. But sadly, the hope that a global government with the power to ensure a state's security has never been realized. Any survey of the United Nations, with its inability to intervene in conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Darfur, not to mention Iraq in the very recent history, comes to the same sad conclusion. The United Nations is an organization built on the norm of sovereignty, defined as state primacy and control over its own territory. The UN manages anarchy. It doesn't overcome it, or at least attempts to manage anarchy to varying success. Its interventions are predicated upon state invitation. And Kofi Annan's pronouncement of a state having a duty to protect is subsumed by the UN's respect for sovereignty. Indeed, the modus operandi of the UN is that it cannot keep a peace if there's no peace to be kept. Hence its extreme reluctance to go into Darfur without the invitation of the Sudanese government, a government that may very well be the one committing the atrocities, committing the genocide. And by the way, you may ask, why is the UN going into Darfur today? If you track the battles in Darfur, they've gotten further and further west. The UN is being invited in because the ethnic cleansing is nearly complete. And consider the role of the UN in sovereignty, even in a country like the United States, with no real threat of the UN trying to infringe upon American sovereignty. There's even a political fringe that suggests the United Nations has plans using black helicopters and special instructions on the backs of street signs to conquer the United States. The UN, in many places, promotes fear rather than security. The realist response to the calls to resolve anarchy via either global government, global governance, or international law is that the state that faces an existential threat must either arm itself or find powerful friends. Hans Morgenthau, who authored Politics Among Nations in the 1940s, has become a patron saint of criticism against international organizations. Morgenthau, a German expatriate, witnessed the atrocities of the Nazis. Probably no statement captures the German sentiment of a disregard for international law than the testimony of Hermann Goering at Nuremberg. Prosecutors charged the former Reichsmarshal with a whole series of violations of treaties which Germany had signed and ratified, including the famous Kellogg-Briand Pact, which outlawed war as an instrument of violence in the 1920s. Goering's response was, and I quote, "We considered your treaties to be so much toilet paper." The realist concludes, in the face of rising power and aggressiveness, the state must defend itself, because if you rely on international organizations, you will lose your sovereignty. And since it is the aggressive state that does not respect international law, references to it will fall on deaf ears. For the realist, the only means to ensure peace in this international system is through that ever-elusive balance of power. States are only dissuaded from aggressive war when they believe they cannot win. You ask the realist, I remember being in a seminar from a realist professor, and he once asked, what is it that states in the 19th century Europe wanted? And he answered his own question, whatever they could take. That's ultimately what a state's interest is. The only way to maintain peace is to ensure this rough power balance, because keep in mind, both states have to be convinced that they can't win the war. So they have to be balanced, or at least have the perceptions that they can't win. And states frequently will take chances if they believe they can win, even if they're not ensured that they will do so. This is a system that is not only elusive, but predicated, of course, on fear. Now, unsatisfied with this balance of power as a resolution to war, critics of realism seek to solve the security paradox through addressing the other conditions. Anarchy sort of being cut off from them. Let's turn to the question of the offensive capability of weapons. Now, typically the area of nuclear arms control and reduction is cited, particularly recently, as a real advance in peacemaking. The record of nuclear arms reduction has been impressive recently, but it holds little hope that the overwhelming emotion of fear can be overcome and that we can ever rid the world of nuclear weapons. First, there have been impressive cuts in the existing nuclear arsenals of the United States and the former Soviet Union, now Russia. According to treaty obligations that both countries have signed, though still waiting to be ratified, the two states have pledged to reduce their existing nuclear stockpiles by over 90% from what they were at the height of the peak of the Cold War. This means from a high of roughly 22,000 warheads apiece, they have pledged to reduce them to 1,700 apiece. Keep in mind, every warhead packs an impressive punch. Even the smallest of these are roughly 10 times the blast of the bombs which destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the largest of these warheads, which still exist, contain as much as 30 megatons of blast, 30 million tons of TNT. And that doesn't even include the accompanying radiation. That's just the blast. If a 30 megaton bomb were dropped on Omaha, Nebraska, we would be killed in Los Angeles. And these warheads still exist under the arms reduction treaties, and we're far away from even getting to 1,700. It's simply a pledge. It hasn't been implemented. Now consider, whenever you have anybody address you who deals with nuclear weapons, the issue of the zero option comes up, ridding the world of nuclear weapons. Proposals for the zero option are always met with the fear-based presumption that some actors would probably hide a nuclear bomb. We call that the bomb in the basement scenario, and it always comes up, I guarantee it. And they would use this bomb in the basement either to launch a war or engage in nuclear blackmail. The fear is considered valid, even though the only time in human history where a state had unilateral possession of nuclear weapons was in the late 1940s, mid to late 1940s, and US attempts to leverage nuclear power were horribly unsuccessful at compelling the Soviets to, for instance, withdraw from Eastern Europe. Nuclear blackmail doesn't work. So states are considering spending billions on national missile defense, despite that such a system has never proven to work even in a lab. Even if missile defense worked, fear would compel it to grow well beyond the capacity to shoot down a missile or two, because the enemy may arm itself with multiple weapons. Oh, and by the way, if terrorists got their hands on these weapons, they'd probably deliver them via suitcase bomb. What good is a missile? And by the way, if terrorists got a hold of a suitcase bomb, what good is 1,700 warheads? It's not going to stop the terrorists from detonating that bomb. Oh, unless you think that the United States, for instance, and other states certainly have as well, are simply focusing on defensive weaponry, the Bush administration is currently proposing to Congress the development of what they call reliable replacement warheads, RRWs. These are intended to replace the current warheads that are deployed throughout the United States and Europe. Arms control specialist Joseph Sorin-Sion was recently at USC, and he derisively termed these, and I wish I had coined this term, RRWs, really redundant warheads.